A warm welcome to you. If you've just tuned in, I'm Michelle Craig. So Eskom issuing a power alert informing the public that stage 2 load shedding will be implemented from today, stretching into the weekend. In yesterday's notice, the power utility says this is the only option left as it grapples with insufficient generation capacity and its inability to replenish emergency energy reserves. A report by PwC estimates the blackouts will halve GDP growth and cost 350,000 in potential jobs, coupled with putting a dampener on potential investment. For more on the story, let's bring in Business Unity South Africa President, that's Professor Bonang Mohale, and Chris Yelland, who is an energy analyst. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning. Chris, I want to begin with you because it is so difficult to keep up with the various scenarios that Eskom is painting for the public so that we can understand where load shedding is coming from. What's new for you, Chris, out of this latest round of load shedding that's put us back into the situation again?
Really, nothing much new. It's just more of the same, and unfortunately, it's worse. It seems to me, from what I read and the announcements made by Eskom, that unplanned breakdowns are reaching very high levels.
Yeah.
Planned maintenance is being cut back slightly, in order to avoid the impact of load shedding or the most serious impact of load shedding. But still, we are plunged into stage 2 load shedding, and it's been worse, of course, this last week. We also hear that because they've been running the emergency reserves hard, the water in the pump storage schemes needs to be replenished, and also the diesel stocks in South Africa are running low. These open cycle gas turbines use vast amount of diesel, and apparently the country is running low. It's all imported, and we're waiting for the next ship to come in.
Yeah. And then there's the story about Medupi. It's difficult to understand the issue around Medupi, isn't it? Particularly with the story that emerged a couple of weeks ago around Unit 4 at Medupi, which we're now being told won't return to service anytime soon. How much of an impact is that having on current load shedding?
Yeah, look, Medupi's generators are generating at full load about 720 megawatts. One unit has exploded. We've read all about it. And it's going to take several years to replace completely. It's completely destroyed, cannot be repaired, has to be replaced, and that impacts on the energy availability factor of Medupi, which is already very low. So Medupi is running at an energy availability factor of about 60%, which is about the same as some of the very oldest power stations. Kusile, also a new power station or coming on stream, is only running at about a 30% energy availability factor. So this new plant is performing like old plant. And although it's coming on stream slowly, it's not helping to build up the average energy availability factor because this new plant is performing, like old plant. So it's really just maintaining the unacceptably low energy availability factor. And what we need now is new capacity coming on stream fast that performs like new capacity with high availability factors, so that it can start to slowly, as it comes on stream, lift the average EAF. But at the moment, this utility scale new generation capacity is going to only come on stream in 2 to 3 or 4 years' time.
Yeah. Bonang Mohale, I want to bring you into the discussion as we talk about the impact all of this is having on South Africa's economy. In fact, President Cyril Ramaphosa, in his weekly newsletter, which landed today, talks about, this being the time of year when we normally bring together investors from across the country and around the world, in fact, and those conferences are held usually here in South Africa. It would be a difficult scenario under the current load shedding to bring in investors right now.
Michelle, you're absolutely correct. But also I think what should worry us is that the new Minister of Finance, Ino Godongwana, told us at the time of the 2 weeks in July of rampant looting that it was going to take us probably up until 2023 for us to recover. He also said that we are wiping off an entire 1% GDP from our growth. But as if that's not enough, remember at that time, we're still having the Eskom blackouts and the rolling blackouts that probably started in January of 2008. 13 years later, we have not been able to fix this problem, thereby leading to the lowest levels of confidence, hope, and trust since the Second World War. So when we say we're going to have investors at this time, what are we going to tell them other than a story of woes? But what worries me more than anything else is that as business, we know that each time the lights go off, not only do we wipe off an entire percent of GDP growth in a year, but we used to lose 1 to 2 billion a day, every day that we switch off. Remember, in the mines, the 400,000 workers, when you tell them you are planning a load shedding for that day, they just don't go down because they are not sure that they'll be able to be brought up safely. So today, I think on average, we are probably losing about 3 billion a day, every day. But for me as a parent and as business that is looking at filling the jobs pipeline at the time that the single most systemic and systematic risk is Eskom, the second biggest is youth unemployment at 74.9%. Nobody worried about our grade 12 writing their first paper exams in darkness. In fact, it's only when Eskom said we are going to stage 4 load shedding that the politicians clamored, summoned the Eskom board and the Eskom executive by saying you'll have to keep the lights on at whatever cost. So we knew that they were burning diesel, they were pumping water, they were using emergency reserves because the base load was actually not adequate. In fact, as business, we knew when they announced stage 4 that actually when you do the back of a cigarette box calculation, it was going to stage 6. So we are surprised when the Minister of Public Enterprises, having spoken to the Eskom executives and Eskom board, quickly said, you know what, the stage 4 that has just been announced is going to be rolled back to stage 3, so that is stage 2, so that by Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, that there will be no load shedding, so that we prepare for a seamless 1st of November elections, not preparing for the pipeline of the future jobs, future economic growth, which is the young people. So I think the voters have really spoken unequivocally with a singularity of mind to say we are no longer happy with the risk that Eskom has brought to the country, Michelle.
Yeah, the CSIR, in fact, a report by that organization has some stomach-churning statistics about what load shedding has cost our economy. We've experienced for the first half of 2021 roughly 650 hours, so about 15% of the time we've had load shedding in our country for the first half of this year. Chris, how do we move the dial insofar as our discussions around load shedding is concerned? Because as you said at the beginning of our chat this morning, you know, it's much of the same. When Eskom brings out their statements about Medupe shutting down, Unit 4 exploding, a major incident in Zambia on Saturday affecting the entire power pool in Southern Africa, it's much of the same. How do South Africans begin to understand the extent of load shedding and what our future looks like in this country?
Yeah, I think we have to understand very clearly what's causing the problem. Number one, old plant every year is getting older. So the energy availability factor of the old plant is reducing year by year. We need to be replacing this old plant with new plant that performs like new plant. So Medupe and Kusile are coming on stream, but are coming on stream with an energy availability factor as low as the old plant. So they're not helping to bring the average EAF up. And the next thing, of course, is that we need to bring on new generation capacity that performs like new generation capacity, and we need to bring it on in surplus, because at the moment there is not sufficient generation capacity reserve in order to have sufficient space to do the necessary maintenance. Now, I must stress that maintenance is necessary all through the life of the plant. It's absolutely necessary but it's not the solution. It's not on its own. It's not going to raise the energy availability factor. And really what we have to do is bring on new plant that performs like new plant to replace the old plant that has reached end of life. And really we've got to focus on this mine and treat it as a national emergency. It's no good having an emergency procurement program that takes 2 or 3 years to actually go out to tender and announce preferred bidders, but we still have not reached financial closure. This is now, since load shedding stage 6 in December 2019, we haven't even signed the orders for the emergency procurement. That is not treating the problem like an emergency. We need stuff fast. And I think the private sector, business, in fact, and industry have got to take ownership of their own energy futures and supplement their energy needs with own generation. And that's why that 100 megawatt limit that was lifted from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatt, above which below which you don't need a license, is a very important and necessary step, but it's not sufficient. We need to now remove all the other barriers, and we need to facilitate this and incentivize it and get the private sector moving, because they are the solution in the short term.
Yeah, so part of what you're saying there is that business must supplement its own energy needs. Bonang Mohale, what are those conversations looking like with governments? Chris is talking about the fact that we need to address it with a kind of speed and urgency that clearly has been lacking in the way that we've been addressing our energy crisis in the country. Is business doing enough insofar as supplementing its own needs?
I think it has been excruciatingly slow. Business has been begging, going down on its knees to say this country's economy is never going to recover until and unless we as business are allowed to roll our sleeves and help, because we are patriotic, we are conscientious, and we just want to make sure that we become internationally competitive. But for many years, the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy saw it fit to limit businesses' participation to 1 megawatt, when we were saying we need more than that. And they said maybe we could consider bringing up to 10, only when the president intervened that it went to 100 megawatts. But by the time you make a decision and the time the business invests and it gets on stream, that's 36 months. And yet we knew at the time that we built Medupi, Kusile and Ingula, which is hydroelectric power, that this 9.6 gigawatt from Medupi, from Kusile, and I'll round off the figures, at about 30 billion has now gone to 54 billion. But you see, the state capture is still continuing, because Chancellor House, owned by the ANC, then saw it fit to buy a stake in Hitachi. So instead of US government holding their contractors finally accountable, now you're in bed with them. In fact, when the cost increases, because you can't pay your own people at Luthuli House, you can't pay your own provinces in their own offices in the 9 provinces, you end up actually celebrating when the cost moves from 30 to 50 billion. So we've got a perverse incentive. Lastly, Michelle, I think what is really needed is to accelerate the provision of electricity as the fourth means of production, where land is the primary means of production. But at the moment, when you look at the people that were making the money when we were moving the coal from Transnet on rail now to the road, is ANC cadres. When you look at the people who benefited the most, when we had a budget in 2010 of 2 billion South African rand and it went up to 10 billion, those people that benefited were ANC deployees. Now, when you look at the people that are benefiting from these contracts in Medupi and in Kusile, and even in the provision of emergency power, because whenever there's emergency procurement, everywhere else in the world, especially in this country, we know that it's an opportunity for corruption. The intent is corruption, not the consequence. So I think there is absolutely no sense of urgency. There is no seriousness in addressing this. Would rather be classified as another failed African country, when actually what we inherited is an infrastructure that works. The little and the least that was expected from us was to perform planned and preventative maintenance. But even that we left, absolutely. Imagine you've got a car and the manufacturer tells you that every 10,000 kilometers you have to take it in for service. You run it day and night. 10,000 comes in, you say, no, keep it running at whatever cost. That's what we did in 2010. That's what we did in preparation for the 1st of November elections 2021, which then means the only effect is that you have the life of that car. So what we have done with our power stations, not only have we halved their lifespan, but we have actually ensured that even the ones that were performing well are now actually relegated to the scrap heaps of old, unreliable, and indeed a failing infrastructure. Thank you, Michelle.
Chris Yelland, with the moment we have left for our interview, here's a question for you. Power stability, when does that happen in our country?
Yeah, look, you've got to understand that this load shedding, as painful as it is a step to maintaining power stability and avoiding a national blackout. So whilst it is very painful, it is very damaging to the economy, it is part of the levers that Eskom pull in order to maintain at least some measure of power system stability. But it is becoming more and more frequent. It is becoming deeper. The problem is becoming deeper. And it's really as a result of the neglect of this matter for a long, long time. And the solutions are going to take time too. But there are short-term solutions. And that's where I think the private sector, with own generation, distributed generation, embedded generation, can play a very important part of relieving the power system and relieving Eskom from a burden that it is clearly unable to meet at this time.
Chris Yelland is an energy analyst. Bonang Mohale is Busa president. To both our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning on the AM Report. Unfortunately, there is no good news as part of this discussion. Still to come for you on the program, ANC supporters in